Okay, you're good, Linda.
There we go. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Excellent. You like to think, you know, we keep doing this thing about women in tech. And I'm thinking women in tech was just making sure I can get some, you know, get a Zoom presentation up. But I guess just following on from what Steve has just said, I do have a background in Littlewoods, and Littlewoods back in the day was an organisation that was very forward thinking, that was thinking about diversity, charitable giving. All of that was very much at the heart of what it did, and it agreed to set up Charities Trust as a payroll giving agency, as the only real, if you like, competitor in this space to Charities Aid Foundation, who had been operating since about 1926 in this charitable space. When I was involved, it was probably about 1994, I was approached because the organization kind of wasn't meant to cost Littlewoods anything. And when they, you know, when large corporates have this idea of setting up charities that are not meant to cost anything, and like they do, they kind of need sorting out. And one of the things that was interesting, I sort of identified then, that there was something really interesting in payroll giving generally, and something interesting about how that could actually transform giving in some way. I continued to work for Littlewoods until about 2003, and Charities Trust by then was a department of mine. I was head of corporate affairs, and I used to manage things like ethical trading for Littlewoods and their social impact and stuff like that. And Charities Trust was a department, if you like. But I always felt again that it had some real opportunities. So when the Barclay brothers took over basically bought Littlewoods, sort of lock, stock and barrel at that stage, I worked with them because I really cared about Charities Trust and wanted to make sure something good happened with it. And what I did feel was that the most important thing that could happen is that it could spread its wings and become its own organization, rather than almost being treated as a subsidiary, where by its very nature, even if you're thinking about some kind of investment in its technology, it was going to be some way down the line from the likes of telephone ordering or high street operations. And I worked with the Barclay brothers to actually set Charities Trust free in 2003. And then I became a non-exec director with the trust. And then at that point, we had a really interesting, my predecessor was quite interesting, but she was quite a lady that had sort of, in some ways, had lost her way a little. I'll be really polite. She'd lost her way a little bit, and in 2010, I said, well, look, you know, this matters to me. It's really been part of my DNA. So what I'll do is I'll look after it for a little bit, and we'll make sure we get the right person in. And then about 3 weeks later, I was offered the job. And after about 8 years of consulting, where I was really happy doing that, I took the job. I took the job on. So what I'm going to present to you tonight, it's lovely to indulge in talking a little bit about Charities Trust. We normally only do this when we're pitching for some work. So it's really nice to share some of the things and where it's come from. But I'll probably take you from about 2010 to today, and take you over that last decade and some of the things that we have moved from being quite a modest payroll giving agency through to what we are doing today. So we have this lovely strap line about giving feels good. We want to energize giving and all that goes with that. And I just thought I would give you some facts and figures about the size of this sector. And when you're thinking about COVID and economic support to this sector, as you will see there, you know, there's a combined income of 39 billion per annum. Apart from small business loans and stuff like that the Chancellor has given, the only real support was in the region of 750 million, of which about 200 million was being pumped into the hospice movement. So as you can tell from that, and I'll come on a little bit later to the, if you like, the coronavirus impact across the sector generally. As you can see, when you're just putting those two things in context, it's a big sector, and it's had a very small support and input to that. And yet the demand for its services is probably bigger than ever. I like to just put in, when we talk about the automotive industry or universities, so we talk about all of these, in fact, the charities combined is larger than all of that. And I think just popping down to those volunteers, what is quite interesting is there is still a culture where individuals and lots of people think that everybody works for free. And of course, there is a lot of people that work for free. And if we were to capitalize that, we're talking about £24 billion worth of volunteering that takes place. But I think that the number that I want us to focus on is looking at that individual donation level of 9 billion per annum. And that 9 billion per annum is just keeping charities and services, largely of which are supporting public services, going. So you can see what an important sector the charities sector is. So what does Charities Trust do in the middle of all of this? So we are a donations management organisation, and we live and breathe to helping grow charitable giving and making giving easy. We are regulated by HMRC, the Charity Commission, and also the Gambling Commission. So we're able to offer, and I'll go into our products in a little bit, we're able to offer quite a wide-ranging opportunity for people to give in different ways. And in my opinion, it allows people to give, whether you're incentivized through things like prize draws or lotteries, whether or not you just want to give some money, whether you want the tax advantage of having payroll giving. There is an absolute mass range of opportunities of how you can actually support the sector and the causes that matter. In terms of our credentials, these are the credentials that we have today. So every year we process at least 3 million individual payroll giving donations. And all of that is tax relief at source, and so is dead easy. So if there's any organizations out there that don't have a scheme, you should have one. It is the easiest thing ever, and the easiest way for people to give to their own favorite causes. In the last decade alone, we've processed over £700 million. And what is quite interesting there, if you take the 20 years before, it took us about 20 years. I think it took us 10 years to get to 10 million. I think it was something like that. I'll have to dig that out at some stage. So you can see the acceleration that we've had year on year, if you like, since that. And that last little bubble, what we talk about, and I'll show you in a minute, is per capita, how many really try and keep the organization lean and mean. And I'm very keen on tech and our platform development and how it can make things so much better. In terms of this 98.6%, you can see from that, the commercial bods in the room will see, it's really quite hard managing a not-for-profit. It's really strange because having come from a commercial environment, you kind of, you're not designing a budget every year to make money, but what you are trying to design is something that will be able to provide the service at the best possible way you can, but it also create some surplus in order for us to keep reinvesting and also build reserves for rainy days, a bit like today, and I'll come on that a little bit later. But also we service it's about 1,100 corporate clients, and they are traditionally processing through to about 18,000 different charities each year. So we have a huge database, of which I will also, again, come on to, that is fully verified. and has all the due diligence on it to allow people to naturally just flow their donations through as quickly as possible. So I'm giving you a slight snapshot to what I'm expecting April 2021 to look like. But when I took over the responsibility for Charities Trust, we had a turnover of £32 million with 32 staff. And then April 30th, 2020 was was my 10th anniversary, and we had processed £111 million with 32 members of staff. And then you will see that we're probably one of the very few organisations that will have a positive impact during this horrendous virus and pandemic that we're facing. But we're anticipating processing over £204 million with 32 members of staff. And that's really important to me, because wherever we are, we can keep our fees as low as possible if we can keep developing the technology and having less hands. And what we've done, we've evolved over those last 10 years to recruit in largely higher quality individuals, if you like, doing more specific things, and the technology helping support the automation and the acceleration of the donations through. Just a little flavour of some of our clients, and as the previous slide showed, we've had some of these clients for a long time. The Royal Mail is somebody who's been with us for over 20 years. The likes of Aviva have been around for 16 years. And we perform very well in the financial service sector. And I think that's because we put a lot of effort into the security and the verification and diligence around the charities that we pay. So we're trusted to be able to handle those funds in their millions and keep them safe on their onward journey. In terms of how our products, so when Steve was describing Nigel Lawson and payroll giving, that was one little hexagon there where we had payroll giving, and out of that 111 million that we processed last year, around 48 million is payroll giving, and the rest of those little hexagons are the things that are, if you like, are generating the rest. So some pretty big corporate funds. And very often what we're doing with those corporate funds is having them available not for individual selection, but largely for employee selection. So a lot of our very generous corporates are matching their employees' donations. So that's been really tough in today's space because there's no event fundraising taking place. Everything's been cancelled. You know, as we know, the London Marathon, where they anticipate £60 million being generated, nothing. All of that would have traditionally been matched by ourselves and Charities Aid Foundation and other big corporates that are doing different things. I'll come on a little bit. I'm interested to highlight for you some things like the loyalty and reward donations, because this is where I think that Charities Trust sets itself apart. Because we don't tend to just look at the traditional forms of fundraising. We will try and help organizations who are also trying to do good things to do good things. And very often we are approached by partners, and the one thing that they never have is a charity database, and they're not able to offer choice. And the discerning fundraiser and donor wants to be able to give to who they want to give to. So I'll come on to that in a second. But as you can see there, text donations, contactless donations, we've got to create an ability to be able to process these things, so things that become quick and snappy and really easy without charities actually suffering in the, if you like, in the process. I wanted to highlight specifically our charity database, and I'm going to skip and then come back to that slide. But as you can see there, there's over 30,000 live beneficiaries on our database. There are over 200,000 charities in the UK, but a big chunk of those are not necessarily fundraising charities, so they might be housing associations, organisations like that. But what you can see there is that what we've got is charities available that have all been fully verified, will have had PEPs and adverse media checks on them, on all of their trustees. And so it's the best it can possibly be in terms of assurance for you to be able to process those funds through. And what you will also start to see is that one of the growth areas has essentially been around things like overseas charities. And we, we're global in many respects, but as we work with clients like Barclays and Aviva that operate in over 40 different countries, we're entrusted to also provide the flow through of those donations to those countries overseas as well. So what you can see, going back to that slide, is that they're all the things that we do with our charity database. And one of the things that I've been talking to my board about is kind of almost this is a proper jewel in the crown, because this is something that belongs to us, has been built up over time, and you can't just buy this off the shelf. So yes, of course, you can engage with the Charity Commission, but the Charity Commission will just give you a name. The Charity Commission will tell you, here is a charity, and yes, it has and yes, it's registered, and that's it. And the reality is the vast majority of our corporates, that doesn't go far enough. So with things like sanction screening, OFAC screening, sort of PEPs and adverse media checks, all of those things are done, or if you like, on a daily basis to make sure that the reputational risk is managed as much as it possibly can. And the way in which I've highlighted that little hexagon there is really around the fact that this is the way in which we can hook into our partners. So by developing APIs that allows that data flow through to other partners, organizations, and I'll explain some of those in a second, but other organizations can actually utilize our charity database and offer the public something which is actually really secure and safe. So how do we use ourselves as an external platform? And this was all about the diversification from things like payroll giving and fundraising and so on. So if you picture our charity database at the heart of all of that, that is a description of some of our key partners. So I'd like to highlight the likes of For Good Causes. So For Good Causes approached us about 18 months ago with an idea that the two guys that founded that organization, one worked for Shell Loyalty and the other one had worked for Experian. And what they had established was that there was over £7 billion worth of unused loyalty points sitting outside in the, if you like, in the marketplace. So your Nectar card, your Tesco Club card, and there's about 200 different schemes. But what tends to happen is we all save our points, and most people forget about them. Some people will use them. And it was kind of, well, what are we going to do? How do people know what they've got, what they haven't got? So they came up with an idea to build a platform where if they could unlock £100 million worth of unused reward points that isn't costing anybody anything, it's sitting on the balance sheet of some big corporates, the likes of Boots and Tesco. They're very, very happy to release that from their balance sheet because it sits there as a contingent liability at all times. And so what we've been doing is working with them to offer the ability for somebody to exchange their points for a charitable donation. So the concept is really simple. You will go onto their For Good Causes site, you will have a look at who their key partners are. They've just launched a big scheme with BP. And then what they'll be able to do is if you have BP points, you can go on to their to go onto BP's site, say you want to redeem it as a charitable donation. And then what you're plugging into is you're plugging into 4 good causes who will redeem that with BP and sort all that out. And then what we will be doing is we will be putting our charity database there for you to choose the charity or good cause of your choice. Now, the interesting thing about having an organisation like Just Giving on there is that Just Giving are interested in our non-registered charity database. And the reality around that is that Just Giving are registered and if you like, regulated to fundraise for charities only. Whereas we are regulated and governed in order to also pass through to good causes. So the ability for Just Giving to be able to offer an additional 10,000 good causes, if you like, to their fundraising, their fundraising consumers, if you like, could be really interesting. So this is actually taking us down an interesting road where our charity database and platform partnerships is potentially a real opportunity for people, for employers, and also for Charities Trust. But what it does do, it doesn't take us away from what we're doing at the heart, which is collecting a donation and distributing it to the destination of that individual's choice. That remains at the heart of what we're doing every time. So I thought I'd just highlight coronavirus and give some flavors as to what the corporate response has been to, if you like, with ourselves, as well as the impact to the sector in general. So in, the sector itself, we're using this phrase, facing a bit of a triple whammy. So, very, very severe financial restrictions. What we're talking about here is in that 12-week lockdown, there has been £12 billion loss to the sector. And that's enormous when you think about what it's doing. So yes, you hear about Captain Tom, and those things are amazing. And then that contributed to NHS Charities Together that have raised 100 million. We've got the National Emergencies Trust that have raised another 16 million. But as you can see, in the concept of these numbers, those numbers are quite small. So there's still a huge amount of support that the sector does in fact need. I think it's been really interesting that this concept around increased demand for services, something like 47% of the charities that provide services have seen an increase. So we've been talking here about homeless charities. Obviously, you've been hearing about food banks, domestic abuse. There's an absolute raft of services that are so needed in these really, really strange times. So at the same time that's going up, the financial restrictions are coming down, there's no grants to be made, and volunteering has dropped off a cliff, and largely because our gorgeous volunteers that were talked about, those 14 million volunteers, the vast majority of them are in our elderly character, if you like, category. Forgive me, Steve, I know that you've just turned a very significant age, but amazing. The vast majority of those volunteers are 70 plus. So of course, with them taking more care, we're not able, and the organisations are not able to facilitate them, if you like, coming in. But I think it's the reported fall that is going to be part of the issue here, as to what people are anticipating later. There are some trading organisations that are going to be able to retrade, so charity shops can now open, but I mean they're teetering on the brink. That in reality, who is going out shopping, who is going to go out there? And then you might think, well, okay, shops might do better. I think there's a mass unknown as to what the real impact is going to be. I was talking to somebody earlier today that was saying that in reality, There hasn't been a charity that has gone bust yet. But in all of that, so you're thinking, oh, that's really positive, you know, that's all great. But the reality is there's been so many sticking plasters on lots of different things. So when I was talking to Big Issue Invest, you know, all of their investees are organizations as social enterprises, the trading ones in particular, have not been able to repay their loans. So you're thinking, well, how do they get a grant? How do they repay the loan? They've got to open up. All the same stuff that we're focusing on with the economy in general, but we've got to get kick-started the charity sector as well. In terms of how Charities Trust specifically, and so taking you back to the bubble that was the 204 million. So back in March, you know, I met with my finance and audit committee and my board, and I presented a complete doomsday, and I'm thinking all of this amazing stuff we've been doing all over the years, oh my God, it's all going to be shattered. So I presented an absolute doomsday scenario of what was going to happen with Charities Trust and how it was going to be impacted by the pandemic. And then about a week later, we got a phone call from the Telegraph, and the Telegraph said, Linda, we need an appeal. We need to do something. And it's interesting, when you're looking at the newspapers, it was all like, we expected the Guardian to ring first, but the Telegraph rang first. And they said, right, we're just going to set up and we're going to pick such an amazing organization called Turn to Us, where they will be providing, if you like, on the street financial support to people who literally in a matter of weeks were not able to even afford to purchase any food for their family because they had lost their jobs. They were in the gig economy. They couldn't access universal credit. There was a whole host of things. And the Telegraph embraced that organisation, and they raised over £1 million in 6 weeks. Then the Times called, and the Times said, Linda, we need to do an appeal. And I'm like, oh. And by this time I'm thinking, okay, we were okay managing the Telegraph, but now I've got everybody working remotely. How do I develop a call center remotely? How do I do this? And literally we had, and some of this is a bit of luck, I can't say I was planning for a pandemic, but we had invested in a new phone system the year before that would allow us to twin with, if you like, with people's mobile phones. And what that allowed us to do was we literally taxied out handsets to about a dozen members of staff, and we created a virtual call center from people's homes, so that the Times and the Telegraph appeals could run concurrently, and then allow those two appeals to thrive. And also for Charities Trust to respond to that, what was in about 4 days. I was very proud of, very, very proud of my staff. And so when I was presenting back to my board in April, I was saying things are looking up, this is looking a lot better. I'm really pleased that everybody's responded. We haven't furloughed any members of staff, we need everybody. And then Barclays called, and Barclays are our biggest client, and they're a very generous organisation, and they just decided to create a COVID-19 appeal worth £100 million. And I nearly fell off my chair at that point and thought, oh, you know, £100 million, well, you know, okay, that's lovely, what do you want us to do to help you? And they said, well, we want you to help us process at least £80 million of that 100 million. And it was a crazy moment when you just think that during this time I'm working on planning for using my reserves, which is what they're for, the rainy day support, all of that. And then Barclays comes along and says, we need to help everybody. And in addition to that, there was the likes of Aviva, that they put an additional £30 million. Cadent, who are the people that dig up your roads, and was Transco and British Gas, they came along, put tens of millions in. And so as a result, some of those very large organizations genuinely at their heart want to be able to support their employees, supporting their favorite causes, not just dishing out if you like, large donations to, if you like, to large charities. Barclays have ring-fenced 50 million specifically to support their employees, to support their favorite causes. So they've done some amazing stuff. And I will still do that with 32 members of staff, which will be good. It's become a bit scary at times, as the amount of match applications are coming through. But what that's also done is it's put us in quite an interesting position to do a lot more donor advisory work. And by that, I don't mean consulting. What I mean is that using Charities Trust as that repository, that safe repository for holding money tax efficiently, knowing that whatever you decide, you know, in terms of you as an individual, you as a corporate, deciding where you want that money to go, we will make sure it has a safe passage through, fully verified. We'll also say no if it's not right, and all of those things. But I think that the reputation that Charities Trust has built, even in the last 12 weeks with some of our major clients, I hope will be, if you like, almost a legacy for the future. And because I'm kind of nervous now as chief exec, I'm in next year already, and I'm thinking, what does this look like? Is it down to about 70 million? What's this going to look like? And that's okay if that happens. We know that there's quite a lot of one-offs in this year, but if we've responded so well and so positively, and we know that we've taken our organization almost from a working perspective into the new normal already, I kind of wish I didn't have 3 years left on my lease. I think I'd be doing a lot more different things. I think I could be creating home working hubs, and so I'm kind of working on what that might look like later. But yeah, I think the pandemic for us has positioned us well, but I think it's our reputation that we've gained over the previous years that makes us that trusted partner. And that's the stuff that makes me feel great, and allows me to sleep at night when you're doing really good things. So there's my little snapshot of Charities Trust. I just thought I'd show just a couple of little pics around challenges of remote working. Yes, we've got dogs, we've got pets. Steve, it was great to see Pebble earlier. All those things, it is brilliant. And literally, we've had team meetings with a baby in it and a dog in it. And 12 weeks ago, we would never have been like that. It would have been about signing into work and coming into work and coming into an office. And I think that it has really made culturally such a massive difference if we can all get together and make people as effective as possible. So that's me. Thank you very much indeed. Any questions?